So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Richard Leathers, who's going to take you through the content today. So Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Richard. You've got two Richards here today, so again, welcome to the webinar. So we're going to talk about the Global Standards for Food Safety, Issue 8. The standard was released on the 1st of August this year, and the first audits are going to take place on the 1st of February 2019. So a very brief overview of some of the changes, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on each of these as we go. When we worked on version 7 of the standard, I sit on the Technical Advisory Committee for BRC and the various working groups. With version 7, it was fairly obvious that horsegate and food fraud was one of the big things that needed to be addressed. When we started looking at version 8, there was no big thing in many respects. But it allowed the technical working group to focus on things that will improve standards in the food manufacture. So some of the things that you can see here, food safety and quality culture is now going to be compulsory. There needs to be whistleblowing mechanisms at each site. There's some requirements for FSMA compliance because there's a working group in North America as well as the European one. There's liberally sprinkled throughout the standard, there is the requirement to protect digital documents. A lot of companies now are moving away from paper and going to digital documents and digital control. So we have to think there about cyber security. There's some new requirements for internal audits, as is there for supplier approval and monitoring. There's new requirements for traceability. One of the things that has been new to support food fraud has been food defence. There's also requirements for environmental monitoring, which has never been in the standard before, and there's boosted requirements for the need to have fully validated cooking instructions. Historically, the standard has had 7 sections, so we've broken with tradition for version 8. We've got a new section 8 on zoning, high care, high risk, and ambient high care. And there's also a section 9 for traded goods, which used to be a voluntary module. So let's take those individually. The first new change is new clause 1.1.2, and the site's management, senior management, shall define and maintain a clear plan for food safety and quality culture, which shall include defining activities and putting an action plan with timescales. The third bullet point there, you'll notice that there's 2 red stars. That will only come into force 12 months after the standard comes out. Sometimes with BRC we feather clauses in, and this is one of those examples. So you will have to do the top part of that requirement initially on the 1st of February 2019, next year. The review of the effectiveness, how can you review the effectiveness if you've only just put the measures in place? So the bottom bullet point will be assessed by auditors after 12 months. The auditors are not trying to assess the food safety and quality culture on site. What they're doing is assessing the measures that manufacturing sites put into place. So they're not walking around asking people what they do and how they manage food safety culture. It's more of a what you say that you do, but that could have some quite big changes and impacts. The next change is again in section 1, clause 1.1.6. The company shall have a confidential reporting system, and this is to report concerns relating to product safety, integrity, quality and legality. So it sort of part links in with the food safety culture thing that we've seen around communication, but it also links into food defence, food fraud and various other things. The thing that I'm going to point out to you though is the bottom paragraph where the company senior management shall have a process for assessing any concerns raised. So this may be a reporting hotline or what have you, which does need to be confidential. But you need to think that how you're going to demonstrate compliance of the last point to an auditor when they come to assess you at your certification audit. Records of the assessment and appropriate actions taken shall be documented. So it may be that you get someone from senior management or HR, whoever that confidential reporting system detail goes to, it might be that they have to present some detail at that time. Clearly, it will all be confidential. There's a couple of changes on Section 2, Section 2 being the HACCP and food safety section. It's probably one of the biggest sections of the standard. And there's some requirements to ensure that the standard complies with the North American requirements of the Food Safety Modernisation Act, or FSMA. So there's numerous references to the Food Safety Plan. In North America, they don't necessarily refer to it as the HACCP plan. It's moreover the Food Safety Plan. There's also a requirement for training as well as competence and experience for the food safety team, and this satisfies the need for a preventive control qualified individual in North America. Again, we spoke earlier about document control and cyber security. And these are the first links. It's in various clauses, so there's references to clause 3.2.1 and 3.3.1 on document and record control, but there are other places within the standard as well. So where documents are stored in electronic form, these should be stored securely and backed up to prevent losses. And I've put a reference there to the PAS 96 from 2017. The PAS 96 is the tacit document. Some of the big updates on the 2017 version were on cyber security, and there was some really good input there from the National Cyber Security Centre in the UK on some guidelines to have. The PAS 96 is a freely downloadable document. The next section is on internal audits, so 3.4.1. Internal audits, and this part is always in the top 5 of non-conformities audits, simply because a lot of manufacturing sites will do a large block of internal audits immediately prior to when the BRC audit is due. Internal audits are there to verify that systems are in place throughout the year. So as a minimum, it states here that the audits need to be throughout the year and at least 4 different audit dates. Now, that doesn't mean Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is 4 different audit dates. The reason the wording is like that is that to cover seasonal sites. If you're a summer fruit growing operation, then you can't, there's no point auditing that in December. So they do need to be spread throughout the year as best as possible, and that will be audited at certification time. We said about the internal audits being in the top 5. 3512, 3513 is always in the top 2 or 3 non-conformities. And that is, well, typically and historically, that's been about supplier approval and monitoring. If you think about it logically, supplier approval is one thing and supplier monitoring is another. So now, under version 8, those requirements have been split, and you know, there's additional requirements for each. So there's some requirements in 3512 for supplier approval, and there's some new requirements on 3513 for ongoing supplier monitoring, because you'll do different things if you're looking to take a new supplier on than you would if you've got an existing supplier for 10 years or so. And it does say it's based on risk, and the process will be fully implemented. In version 6 and version 7 of the standard, there was a lot of references in various places to root cause analysis needing to be done. But it never really stated, although it was in the interpretation guide, it never really stated what a root cause analysis should contain. This has been addressed in the new standard, or the updated standard, in a new clause of 3.7.3. And it's all about root cause analysis, and it says the site shall have a procedure for the completion of root cause analysis. So how you do, what you do, the whens, the whys, and the hows. At a minimum, root cause analysis shall be used to implement ongoing improvements and to prevent reoccurrence of non-conformities when analysis of non-conformities show for trends show there's been a significant increase in a type of non-conformity. Now, that isn't necessarily just a number crunching exercise, because you can have fewer non-conformities, but if the significance of them is greater, then that might be a significant trend. So that's one thing. The other thing that has to be addressed is where the non-conformity places the safety, legality or quality of product at risk. If you're consistently producing poor quality product, then there is a specific need to do root cause analysis. And in the interpretation guide for BRC, there's some updated requirements and some really good guidance. One thing that is now a decision made by BRC, that the interpretation guides are going to be more freely available. So if you go onto BRC Participate and register on there, a lot of the guidelines will now be freely able to be downloaded. So there's a lot more information on what sits behind each individual clause. So in this particular clause, there's a lot of information to assist you. In addition, we run a lot of root cause analysis courses here because some sites want to have 10 or 12 people trained in root cause analysis across the business. So that's a service that Camden BRI can provide. The next clause, 3.9.1, is about traceability. And we've always had traceability in the BRC standard, but we've never before had a requirement to have a documented procedure for how you perform that traceability. If you think about it logically, this is fairly obvious, but it's something that a lot of sites haven't got, simply because when it's time to do a traceability at audit, what we tend to do is get the expert in that does the traceability, and they work through it, and everything's compliant. But what happens if that person's not there? What happens at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning when we need to know how that traceability procedure works? So it's a positive step forward to have a documented procedure in place, and as a minimum it shall include how that traceability system works and any labelling and records that are required. So it might sound fairly simple and straightforward, but it is something to work on for some manufacturing sites. One of the big new changes is in food defence. We saw in version 7 that food fraud came to the fore, and this is a GFSI requirement to have a food defence plan in place. So a lot of the requirements are quite similar to those for food fraud in terms of clause 5.4.1, 5.4.2 and 5.4.3, and a lot of companies have decided to incorporate their food fraud and food defence plans and policies. And again, if you look at the guidance document in the UK, which is the PAS 96, talks about TASUP, and within the remit there, it covers food fraud and food defence. So a lot of companies are looking to complete one assessment. The clause itself says the company shall undertake a documented risk assessment of the potential risks to the product from any deliberate attempt to inflict contamination or damage, and this is to include both internal threats, so those at the manufacturing site, but also external threats, so at either ends of the supply chain, either before that material comes to you or after it leaves you. So it covers the internal and the external threats of deliberate contamination or damage. Some of the outputs needs to be documented, and the plan needs to be kept under review and should be reviewed at least annually or whenever new risks emerge, so a new threat is publicised or identified, or following an incident where product security or food defence is implicated. Now, the best indication there is if you think about customer complaints. If you have a customer complaint that comes back to you that you think that could not possibly have occurred here, well, that could be a tampering incident or a contamination issue that might need to be factored into the food defence plan. Okay, moving on food defence, 4.2.2, where raw materials or products are identified as being particular risk, then clearly there need to be controls in place. Controls should be monitored and the results documented, and again, needs to be reviewed annually or when triggers occur. If there's areas of significant risks, these need to be defined, monitored and controlled. Needs to include external product and ingredient storage and intake points, and this does need to be trained out. So staff will need to be trained in food defence policies and plans. Looking at Section 4 in more detail, Section 4 is about site standards, and 4.4.6 for some sites won't make any difference at all, but for some has got a very, very big impact. And I know, you know, maybe some dairies or breweries or sites such as that, this could have a significant impact. 446, where elevated walkways are adjacent to or pass over production lines, they shall be 3 bullet points: designed to prevent contamination of products and production lines, easy to clean and correctly maintained. So the guidance is that the square grids where product could fall off a shoe or anything like that is not going to be acceptable. So they should be enclosed, they should be sealed, and this links in with some of the EHED requirements, European Hygienic Engineering Design Group requirements, and they've got some very specific guidances there on what a good elevated walkway near production line should be. As I say, for some manufacturing sites, that won't have any impact at all, but for some, it needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, because this isn't something that can be done in 5 minutes. One of the areas that has had significant update is CIP systems. There's always been a requirement for CIP systems within the BRC standard, but again, if you're in a dairy or in any industry that you've got a CIP system in place, I'm not going to go through all of the requirements there, but there's some new things that you really do need to look at, and you know, a number of clauses I've put there. 411.7.1, and it talks about validating of the system, keeping it up to date, rinse solutions, and what have you. But there are other changes as well, and you know, that again, there will be some action that is needed just to double check that the protocols are in place and working. This is a whole section on its own, 411.8, and again, this could have a significant impact. We here at Camden BRI have been very, very busy already with proactive manufacturing sites in terms of helping them with their environmental monitoring plan. All I've put up there is a statement of intent. There's 3 or 4 clauses that detail specific requirements for environmental monitoring. So the statement of intent, there needs to be risk-based environmental monitoring programs in place for pathogens and spoiling organisms. And as a minimum, this includes all production areas with open and ready-to-eat products. So it's not necessarily just high-risk, high-care products. It's not just smoked salmon and sandwiches. It does include things like soft fruit. It does include things like bakeries, because that is production areas with open and ready-to-eat products. So again, we have been very busy assisting companies and manufacturers with their environmental monitoring policies and plans. So that's one clause where have a look at it, and please get in touch with us if you feel that you need some guidance and advice. Another area where we've been quite busy and active is on updated clause 5.1.4, which talks about initial shelf life trials, and there's some new requirements gone in there that that they need to reflect manufacture, storage, distribution and transport, but also use and handling. In the interpretation guide, there's some guidance on anticipated misuse of the product in terms of it might be 2 hours at an elevated ambient temperature. So it's not just looking at perfect temperature handling and what have you. So there might be additional requirements and additional things that need to be factored in. Some manufacturing sites look at you know, of a chilled product, might look at a product at 8 degrees, but that's not consistent with temperature abuse that might occur. So that might be something that needs reviewing. 5.2.5, one of my colleagues, Greg Hooper, has been very active in this area, where cooking instructions are provided to ensure product safety. They should be fully validated to ensure that when cooks occurred according to the instructions, they will consistently produce a safe, ready-to-eat product. Here at Camden, we've got a large selection of ovens, microwaves, etc., and we do validation of cooking instructions. Companies can do it themselves, but Greg has produced some best practice guidelines, which again, there's going to be a link available to that under BRC Participate. But if you need more details, if you send us an email, we can get those details to you, and we can get Greg to get in touch with you. about how and what might be involved in that validation. Typically, companies don't particularly understand validation very well, either when it comes to CCPs or cooking instructions or cleaning, etc. So, you know, there may well be action needed there. 5.6.2.5, and it's updated. It's not a completely new clause, but the significance of laboratory results needs to be understood and acted upon accordingly. So that might be, do you understand the result that your laboratory itself produces, but also if you send some product away to analysis, maybe to ourselves here at Camden BRI, do you understand what that result means? So if it says 18.7 is the result, you know, what's the significance of that? Do you understand the methodology? Do you understand the fact that 18.7 could be a borderline pass, but because of the tolerance of error, could be a borderline fail as well? You know, get in touch with your lab and make sure you do understand those results and the significance of them. 6.1.2, and again, this refers to the digital control. Any changes to equipment settings can only be completed by trained and authorised staff. And again, there's words in there about password protecting. So if they're, you know, a CCP, a metal detector, or an oven or something like that, needs to be appropriately controlled. 7.1.5. Auditors are going to focus a lot on labelling and packing processes. What you find is it's still the largest area of recall and withdrawal is getting the wrong label on a product. So again, auditors will focus on this. So all relevant personnel need to be trained in the labelling and packing processes, but there's other requirements as well that have been updated. And again, if you need some assistance in that, please get in touch. As we said, there's a new section, Section 8. A lot of the requirements of Section 8 are taken from the old Section 4, but it was thought best to have all of the requirements for zoning and production risk zones in one place. But there are some new requirements in there, so don't just think, oh, we used to comply with this in Section 4, so we're bound to comply here. That may not necessarily be the case. And the last section is traded goods. This used to be an additional voluntary module. It's not compulsory, but companies can opt to have it within the scope of their main standard as a Section 9 within the certification audit.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard, for your overview of the changes so far. So you've reached the end of your presentation now, where we've got a few slides to explain how members can find out more information about what has changed. If you have any questions about the presentation, then now is probably a good time to send them in while we're going through the next few sections. I'd just like to raise awareness of news feeds. Most of you will be subscribed to at least one news feed because that's how you would have found out about the webinar. And it's most likely to have been Food Safety Assurance, the distribution list. We have got several distribution lists, so it's well worth reviewing your preferences just to make sure they're entirely up to date. Some of you may have slipped off the list following the GDPR changes, and if you want to opt back in, then you can do that. It's all done on the website, so it's worth having a look at that section. In terms of upcoming events, we've got the BRC version 8 briefings themselves over the next couple of months. There is a website for that event. Several training courses on a range of different subjects as well taking place between now and the end of the year. Again, they've got their own website, so that's worth having a look at. Okay, and some of you may be subscribed to the member interest groups. So these are essentially networking events, member companies. They meet at typically Camden BRI 3 times a year. They're based on a whole range of different subjects, so depending on your area of interest. We've got one based on quality and food safety management, which is probably very relevant to this group. At the events, you get to talk about topical issues. You'll hear updates from Camden BRI regulatory staff. You'll get external presentations. You'll hear about research projects. It's well worth being a part of, but you do have to subscribe to them. It's entirely free. You can join them or leave them at any time. You don't even have to attend the meetings to be able to take advantage of them, but you do need to be on the distribution list. So again, if you're interested in that, go to the Member Interest Group website. So we've got the responses from the previous poll, so thanks for sending those in. We'll get back to some of you in due course. But for now, that brings us to the end of the session. So we've got a little bit of time to have a look at some of your questions. And some of them have been coming in while the presentation's been going on. So the first one on the list, Richard, is which change might have the biggest impact? Is that something you're able to comment on?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones, and I think a lot of the people that voted will say the same, is the compulsory food safety and quality culture. Here at Camden, we've developed a module that module isn't going to be compulsory. But it is down to sites to say how they measure, what they do, how they're looking to improve it, and put some timescales and action plans in place for food safety and quality culture. Food safety and quality culture is not just about training, it's about communication, it's about empowerment. In fact, we call out around 20 different measures that sites might need to consider and look at. So again, if you want any more information, either get in touch or we'll get in touch with you about that one.
Okay, so the next question we've got is about monitoring required for internal audits. And we've been asked, is it just related to non-conformances that are raised internally, or are they related to the annual schedule? Is that a question we can answer?
Yeah, I mean, internal audit should cover the entire food safety management system and also all of the requirements of the standard. So interestingly, some of the things that do need to be covered, and this isn't something I put in the presentation, there's some new requirements for all, that manufacturers have to audit their food fraud and food defence plans as well. So, you know, it does cover the entire food safety management system. You also need to think about who would be capable of auditing those requirements. So I think there is quite a bit of work to do for some manufacturers and some certificated sites related to internal audits.
Okay, we've got a question about acrylamide here, and we've been asked whether the testing is included in the shelf life trials.
It's not specifically stated about acrylamide, but clearly that is a food safety measure. So, you know, if you're doing crisps or chips or baked or fried products, then clearly the auditor will ask about acrylamide. It's not specifically mentioned in the standard, but those are the types of measures that an auditor would be looking for.
Okay, and it's clear that we've got some small businesses that are listening in today. We've been asked about whistleblowing and how a small business could go about implementing procedures for that on their premises. Is there some best practice for whistleblowing in small businesses?
Yeah, again, I think that's a really good one to look at the interpretation guideline, because you know, if you're Heinz or Greencore or Unilever, then it's a much different thing than if you're, you know, a small flour mill that's got 10 people that's working there. So a lot of companies will say, well, our whistleblowing mechanism is that the manager's got an open door. Yeah, but what if you know, the open door is the person that you want to complain about? Then yeah, that is quite difficult in small organisations. So yeah, there is some guidance on the interpretation guide there, but I think the thing to do is to get in touch and to look at that sooner rather than later for small organisations.
Okay, and we've got one more question, and then I think we'll have to draw it to a close, because I'm getting conscious of the time. It's about cooking instructions and whether or not the validation side of things needs to apply to existing products, or if it will just be new products going forward. So what's the situation there?
It covers existing products and new products, so there might be some reverse engineering that has to happen in terms of validating existing protocols. So clause 5.2.5 is you know, really causing a lot of manufacturers to take action, and I know you know, we've produced a lot of guidance and a lot of support for members already. So yeah, please get in touch on that one.
Okay, so on that note, I think we'll draw a line under the questions there. If you do have a question that you'd like Richard to answer at a later time, then you've got his contact details. Feel free to get in touch, and we'll get back to you. So we'll bring the session to a close. All that remains to be said is thank you very much to Richard for his fantastic summary of the changes in the BRC document. It must have been a very difficult job to make those changes and implement them. So thank you to everybody who's dialed in as well for listening to us and also for participating in the poll questions. It was a very good insight for us, and hopefully it was for you as well. We've got several events coming up. Hopefully we'll see some of you at those events. Or maybe even at future webinars or member interest groups. So thank you very much for attending today. Enjoy the rest of your day and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.